How Polish-American immigrants helped gain Poland's independence in World War I by Ismail Hussein. What if I told you that a small unit or fraction of people brought forth the independence of a country? Hard to believe, right? How could a small unit do this? Well, today I'll tell you why, and how a small fraction of American soldiers brought independence to Poland. This is the story of how Polish Americans fought for their home in World War I. Now, before we talk about how this happened, we must go back and see why this happened, and we must see the situation in Poland before World War I. As some people may know, before Poland was known as Poland, it was ruled by three empiric superpowers. Prussia, or better known as Germany, Russia, and the Habsburg monarchy all ruled Poland right before World War I. According to the Library of Congress, at the turn of the 20th century, Polish immigration exploded. Imperial repression, land shortages, and chronic unemployment made life more and more untenable for the Poles of Europe, and as the 19th century waned, they left for America by the thousands, then by the hundreds of thousands. Life was very harsh to the Poles due to these problems under the empires. Life would slowly but undoubtedly get harder and harder, with more challenges due to the improper rule of these empires. This was also on top of the fact that the Poles were actively oppressed due to them wanting their own state while also being discriminated against for their identity and religion. According to the Library of Congress again, the Polish people's own fight for independence was less successful, and their national identity came under harsh attack. By the 19th century, the ancient state of Poland had been conquered and divided up by three imperial powers: the Russian, Prussian, and Austro-Hungarian empires. Although they were separated by distance and political barriers, Poles were unified by a belief in their own independence, in their freedom to worship as Roman Catholics, and in their distinct identity as a people. The difficulty of maintaining this identity under hostile imperial regimes led many Poles to seek freedom overseas. The idea of Polish people wanting their own state was harshly attacked by the ruling empires. The Polish people were also oppressed and did not have freedom due to the fact that they were Catholics and not Protestant or Orthodox. This led to many Poles immigrating to overseas due to the unbearable conditions and the fact that there was a chance for a much better life overseas. Now, what did the Polish people do when they came here in America? According to the University at Buffalo, over 2 million Poles came to the United States, flocking to cities like New York, Detroit, and Chicago for industrial jobs. They embraced democracy and the American way of life, but few forgot how Europe's empires exploited their motherland. As World War I continued to escalate into 1917, it became clear Poland had a chance to become independent. Pianist and future statesman Ignacy Paderewski led a recruitment efforts across the U.S., urging immigrants to free their country. Thousands of Polish Americans volunteered to fight in a Polish unit called the Blue Army, named so because of their light blue uniforms. They would prove to be formidable against their enemies. Quote, "You can see from here that the Poles went and got jobs here in America, mainly industrial jobs. They moved to places such as Detroit and New York for work, but even as the Poles kept moving for work, they always kept their homeland in mind and heart, and eventually they would be able to fight for that homeland." One of the many places which Poles moved to was a place in Michigan called Hamtramck. So many Poles moved there to the point that they made up 83% of the population in the town, giving them the nickname Little Poland. Another group of Poles who adapted to the American lifestyle was the Polish Society in Grand Rapids. According to them, hoping that one day their homeland would be reunited and they could return home, many Poles desired to keep their national and religious traditions and customs alive among themselves and their children. Each church had its own school where English and Polish were taught. End quote. Even though they settled here in America and had comfortable or desirable lives in America, they still wanted to return to their homeland and maintained their identity. How did America get involved in establishing independence for Poland in World War I? Well, according to Adam Walaszek from the University of Krakow, In the last quarter of the 19th century, the idea of Polish independence was carried to the USA by Polish political emigrants or refugees. A Central Polish Committee in New York, Polish Commune in Chicago, and later other societies declared the fight for the homeland's liberation as the emigrants' goal. Particularly active in this respect was the Polish National Alliance, PNA, established in 1880. Quote, according to this, many organizations within America rised up and supported and pushed for the independence for Poland. The Poles within America got involved within the politics of the country and pushed for America to get into the war and to help establish Poland's independence. Now, when did the American Poles get involved into the fight? Well, according to Adam Wałaszek, again, he says, not long after the war had broken out, there were attempts in the U.S. to organize some military actions. In October 1916, some Polish volunteers were trained in Toronto. In March 1917, the Alliance of Polish Falcons, with PNA's help, set up the Polish Military College in Cambridge Springs, PEML. Next month, 4th April 1917, Paderewski submitted an idea of creating in the USA a Polish army called Kościuszko of 100,000 soldiers. Its formation would gain political leverage for himself with the Americans and stimulate the creation of some exile government for the Poles, argues M.B. Biskupski. In Europe, the issue of Polish manpower was raised on both sides of the front line when France, Germany, and Austria faced growing difficulties. When the February Revolution toppled the Tsarist regime, there no longer were any obstacles preventing France and England from taking political initiatives on the Polish cause. On 4th of June 1917, President Raymond Poincaré issued a decree about the formation in France of an autonomous Polish army. Quote, now even thought they don't exactly mention the Blue Army, the Polish fraction in the American military, still went into the war when Britain and France went into the war, and they fought on the front lines in France and Poland. Now, how much did the Polish army do in Poland? Well, they did quite a lot. According to James S. Paula in his work of Our Sacred Duty, Poland's Diaspora Fights for Polish Independence, 1894-1921, he says, the Blue Army brought to Poland some 1,240 officers and about 68,000 men, virtually all of them trained veterans. They also brought with them all of their arms and some very important heavy weapons. These included 18 British-built Bristol F-2 reconnaissance airplanes and Italian-made Ansaldo A-1 Baliglias that provided excellent reconnaissance capabilities, as well as the ability to bomb and machine gun enemy formations and emplacements. They also brought 123 French-made Renault FT-17 tanks that came in two forms, 75 armed with 37mm cannons and 48 with 8mm machine guns. The acquisition of these vehicles gave the Poles what was then the fourth largest armored force in the world. Quote, from what James S. Paula said, the Poles had brought heavy machinery and artillery to fight against the Germans in Poland. What was the result of that? Well, according to Niepodlegla, a government website, they say, after the overthrow of the Tsardom, units consisting only of Poles, 3 corps, were created within the Russian army. Their members tried to distance themselves from the chaos that was growing in Russia, and after the October Revolution, tried to maintain neutrality in the war between the White and Red armies. As a result of the ongoing political changes in Russia, her Western allies, namely the United Kingdom, France, and Italy, began to see Poles as desirable allies. In the summer of 1917, France began forming the Polish Army, named the Blue Army after the color of their uniforms. Soon, volunteers from Western Europe, the United States, and Canada, as well as Polish POWs from the German Army, joined its ranks. The Blue Army began its fight against Germany in the last days of the war. The last Polish divisions fighting alongside the Central Powers were dissolved. In his speech addressing Congress in January 1918, Woodrow Wilson announced the reconstruction of an independent Poland with access to the sea, stating it as one of the conditions for a permanent peace. Quote, as a result of the Blue Army going into Poland, they ended up making the Germans. What was the aftermath of the war? Well, according to Niepodlegla again, when the war in the West ended in October-November and the Austro-Hungarian Empire fell apart, the Poles began to disarm the occupiers and to create the institutions of an independent state. Freed from his German captivity, Józef Piłsudski took over full civil and military authority from the Regency Council as chief of state upon his arrival in Warsaw on November 11, 1918. A new episode in Polish history had begun. Quote, Józef Piłsudski, the one who was in charge of the Blue Army, had took over Poland and he was in charge now. Under his authority, the Poles got rid of the oppressive empires which oppressed the Poles. Conclusion. Poland's independence couldn't have been achieved without the effort from the Polish-American immigrants in America, who used their love of their homeland and sheer force to get rid of the oppressors in their motherland.